On behalf of the League of Women Voters of the Spokane area, welcome to our 2020 primary election candidate forum featuring candidates for the State Legislative District 4, State Representative Position 1. I'm Jenny Darrell, your moderator, and Lisa Kuhar is the league timer. Election day for the 2020 primary is Tuesday, August the 4th, 2020. This is a top two primary in which the two highest vote getters will advance to the general election in November. In this forum, the candidates will have an opportunity to present themselves to the citizens, and the citizens will have an opportunity to learn more about each candidate to help them make an informed decision when they mark their ballots. Before the questions begin, the candidates will have up to 30 seconds to introduce themselves and tell the voters why they're running. I will be asking the candidates questions that have been formulated by the League's Voter Services Committee. Candidates will be asked questions in alphabetical order, with the first speaker rotating with each question. Candidates will have up to 90 seconds to answer each question, with additional time for rebuttal or a follow-up question as appropriate. And each candidate will have the opportunity for a 1-minute closing statement. I will ask as many questions as time allows, and our timer will signal when the speaker has 15 seconds remaining, and again when your time is up. Now, before we proceed, a reminder about voting in the primary. You must be registered to vote. You can register by mail or online by July the 27th, 2020, up to 8 days prior to Election Day. You can register in person up to August the 4th, 2020 at the Spokane County Elections Office, 1033 West Gardner Avenue, and at the Center Place, 2426 North Discovery Place in Spokane Valley for same-day registration. These sites plan to be open with pandemic precautions in place and ask that you complete paperwork online before you come in. Registered voters will receive their mail-in ballots about 3 weeks prior to Election Day. Voters will not need to mark a party preference on this ballot. That was only for the March presidential primary. Ballots must be postmarked or deposited in conveniently located ballot boxes no later than 8 p.m. on Election Day, August the 4th, 2020. Ballots can be dropped off on Election Day at one of the voter service centers. For locations of ballot boxes or voter service centers, information about accessible voting units, or other questions about casting your ballot, contact the Spokane County Elections Office at 509-477-2320 or go to www.spokanecounty.org/elections. Contact information for the candidates as well as a voter's guide can also be found on the website of the Spokane County Elections Office. Additional information about the candidates can be found on the League of Women Voters online voting guide, www.vote411.org. Now I will introduce the candidates for State Legislative District 4, State Representative Position 1. They are Mike Conrad, Republican, Lori Fagan, Democrat, Bob McCaslin, Republican, and Dave Whitehead, who was unable to be with us this evening. Dave Whitehead is a Republican. Before we start the questions, each candidate will have up to 30 seconds to tell the voters why they are running. And we'll start with you, Mike Conrad.
Well, thanks for putting this together. You know, there's a lot of reasons to run, but I think the number one reason to run is to represent the people and to be able to represent, for my purposes, small businesses that are within the sport district. I come from a business background. I've been self-employed for over 30 years, and I have a good idea of what happens when departments come after small businesses and expect them to do a lot for nothing. And I just want to be able to help the 4th District small businesses with this COVID-19 happening.
Okay.
There are a lot of service businesses that are going to be needing a lot of help. So
I thank
I'm
you.
running
I
for
think
that.
your time is up. Thank you. So we will go next to Lori Fagan with the same question.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm Lori Fagan. I am a mom, grandmother, nurse, and nurse practitioner. I've served the people in our district for over 30 years, never asking anyone about their politics as a condition of my care. Now more than ever, it's important to have a state representative you can trust to fight for your health, for your education, and to revive our struggling economy. I show up, I listen, I solve complex problems, and I'm ready to get to work for the 4th District.
Thank you. And that same question goes to Bob McCaslin.
Well, I ran for office for the first time 6 years ago because as a kindergarten teacher, I saw some of the needs that we had in public schools. And I taught for 31 years. I had a lot of other jobs during that time too. So I've got a good wide background to do this job, and I'm a good listener. So I'm running one more time at least. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, candidates. So we'll proceed to the prepared questions. Our first question is for Lori Fagan. What do you consider to be the most important responsibilities of a state legislator, and what specific training, experience, and skills do you have that prepared you for this position?
Well, thank you, Jenny. That's a fantastic question. I believe that the state legislators' priorities have to be the priorities of their district, and that requires being a good listener and also to have a very good understanding of the values of the people that you're representing. So I have had experience not only as a healthcare provider, but as a woman and as a mom and as a grandmother and as a volunteer in our district, focusing on people that have found themselves on the margins. So those are folks that are struggling with homelessness, with food insecurity and hunger, with children that are in foster care. And, I think that it really takes somebody that understands where people are coming from and where they can go. I'm very much an advocate for students and for educators. And again, the skills that are required to be a legislator are to be somebody that can reach across the aisle, that can get the work done, that can collaborate. And as the sole Democrat in this race, I will be positioned to be a wonderful advocate for our folks here in our district and represent everybody. That's what I've always done as a healthcare provider, and that's what I intend to do here for our district.
Thank you. Bob McCaslin, same question goes to you.
I need for you to repeat the question, please.
What do you consider to be the most important responsibilities of a state legislator, and what specific training, experience, and skills do you have that have prepared you for this position?
Well, I believe right now in state government, we've seen in the last 6 years a huge increase in spending and not a lot of accountability for where that money went. And so it's, I think it's important for us to go back to what the function of government is. And I think we really need to be looking at constitutionally, what are the boundaries that our state government has. And as the assistant ranking member on education and early learning, I think those are two priorities in our Constitution. And childcare is a huge issue for me because we've lost 3,000 to 5,000 of them in the last 6 years. And that has come from the Democrats, unfortunately. I'm not questioning their motives by creating a whole new state agency to try to make early education better, but they failed miserably by losing that many child cares. And so Those are my biggest priorities, and transportation too. We need to get our roads back in shape that are beyond that time when they're supposed to be fixed.
Okay, thank you. And Mike Conrad, what do you consider to be the most important responsibilities of a state legislator, and what specific training, experience, and skills do you have that have prepared you for this position?
So I think the most important thing for a state legislator is to be able to represent the people and be able to purvey out there or help change and improve laws. So you're going to create laws as a legislator, but you're also going to change other laws that are perhaps stupid or unusable anymore because they're antiquated because of innovation. But for me, I've already done this before. So I built a business where it was a new idea. It was innovative of how to deliver and distribute food. And I had issues with the Department of Health because they couldn't understand the way we distributed this. So I went to Matt Shea and Senator Patton. We created a bill, and in 2014, we passed the bill within 100 days. So we changed the rules because rules were created by other people who are no smarter than we are. And I want the people of the 4th District to understand that that is the point. If you don't like something, it doesn't work, or there's an agency that's within the state that's coming and putting pressure on you for any reason, I want to represent those people. I want to help those small businesses and those people who have changed how things are done to help with the rules and the laws to mimic that. So that's kind of my goal.
Okay, thank you. The next question will go to Bob McCaslin. What do you think the state role should be in addressing racial injustice and use of force by the police and police oversight? What specific steps would you take or support to address these issues?
Well, and I've worked on some of these issues with Senator Patton, who's on the Law and Justice Committee in the Senate. And the things that we've found over and over again is when you give our state government the power to regulate these kinds of things, what we wind up with is a whole bunch of inmates who are released early. We have problems with property crime in this area. I think we've certainly have to make sure that the few people in law enforcement who might have a bad view of how they are supposed to protect citizens and might need some retraining or might need to leave the profession. But I think the demonizing of our law enforcement people in this country is tragic, and I think it's important that we remember that people are innocent until proven guilty, and that goes from law enforcement side when they look at suspects, but it also has to apply to our law enforcement people too.
Thank you, Bob. Mike Conrad, what do you think the state role should be in addressing racial injustice and the use of force by police and police oversight? And what specific steps would you take or support to address these issues?
So I personally think there should be more local control. I don't think that there should be more regulations. I think there should be less regulations. I think the local Sheriff Ozzie, he's very supported here. We're lucky to have that. I think he got around 78% of the vote in the last election. I just think that the local police, local sheriffs should be able to deal with this. I also agree with Bob that the demonization of the police is absolutely ridiculous. I do not agree with that. I support the local police, and I think that it can be controlled on a local level. Here's the bottom line. Nobody's 100%. No agency, no police force. You're always going to have a bad apple. It doesn't matter how much training, doesn't matter how much you put into it, you're always going to have somebody that does something wrong. And I think that as you train the officers, and you enforce the rules, you're still going to have less than 100%. So you do all you can, but I do not think the answer is more rules, more regulations, more laws. I think it is actually less.
Okay, thank you. And Lori, the same question goes to you. What do you think the state role should be in addressing racial injustice and use of force by the police and police oversight? And what specific steps would you take or support to address these issues?
Thanks, Jenny. I respect that you have just asked two very important questions, one about racial justice and one about police oversight. So let me address them both. The murder of George Floyd flung a curtain wide open into the history of injustices that the Black community has endured for centuries. It's time again to listen, but this time with purpose, and commit ourselves to working together for a truly more just society to reflect the promise of our nation. Every system has ingrained in its history a contribution that brought us here today, and each of us has a duty to examine what we can and what we must do better. And this includes policing and justice and education and housing and healthcare. In regards to police oversight, let me first say that I have always appreciated the dedication of our brave men and women in law enforcement. As a victim of domestic violence, they saved my life. Our communities count on them for public safety, and we know the personal risk that they encounter every day when they go on the job. But as a community, we need to ask law enforcement, as we do with all public service professionals, to adhere to best practices, conduct their duties according to community expectations for roles and accountability and transparency. And this isn't a political or a partisan issue. The state can play an important role by creating a foundation for communities to build by listening and working with community and law enforcement stakeholders and change and dismantle racial bias and injustice, but also protect the integrity of our valued law enforcement professionals.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question, and this is actually a pair of questions. And we'll start with you, Mike. Given the precipitous drop in state tax revenues due to the pandemic and increased expenses for safety net measures, what are your top 3 spending cut recommendations at the state level in order to maintain a balanced budget? And in addition to spending cuts, please explain what, if any, new revenue sources or structural changes to our taxing system you would consider in order to maintain a balanced budget.
So I think that the Olympia has more of a spending problem than a revenue problem. Before COVID, I think we were up about 4% biennium, and the spending is up about 20%. I was actually speaking to Leonard Christian. He was telling me that when he was he was a representative 6 years ago, they were at a $60 billion budget, and now they're at a $120 billion budget. And obviously there's a $9 billion deficit, which they definitely need to address, and it doesn't look like Inslee wants to do that. I think that the bottom line is there's been an overreaction with this COVID, and because of the overreaction, it's caused a lot of problems with small businesses and businesses in general, and especially in businesses in the service industry. That has created this deficit, and I think that we need to relook at this reaction that we've had with COVID. The people are getting COVID, but the deaths of COVID are not as high as they predicted. I personally think that we need to start reopening small businesses, businesses in general, allow people the freedom to be able to choose whether they want to go out to eat or not go out to eat, wear a mask, don't wear a mask. But that's what I would do. That's what I think we need to do, is regenerate those businesses, get them up and running, and get revenue back in. That's my opinion.
Okay, thank you very much. Lori, the same questions to you. Would you like me to read them again?
Yes, please.
Okay. Given the precipitous drop in state tax revenues due to the pandemic and increased expenses for the safety net measures, what are your top 3 spending cut recommendations at the state level in order to maintain a balanced budget? And in addition to spending cuts, please explain what, if any, new revenue sources or structural changes to our taxing system you would consider in order to maintain a balanced budget.
You're right, that's a double question. So I know that at this time we're really unsure what, if any, federal stimulus dollars will be available to help mitigate our response, but we know that we have a lot of very difficult decisions coming up. I know that across the board, state agencies have been asked to identify some potential savings cuts, and we have to consider each of those very carefully. I will be a fiscally conservative and consider any spending cuts when the cost of those agency expenditures aren't supported by investments and return on our investments. So we have to consider all the spending cuts that are available, but we also have to keep in mind that we have to avoid the same kind of cutoff strategy that we had in 2008 when defunding important things like education and essential social services really impacted low to middle class families and ultimately delayed economic recovery. So I can't recommend any specific cuts right now. I do know that our budget priorities should always reflect our values and that we have to preserve investments that create the greatest good, but keep them in mind that sometimes people still end up being left behind. As far as revenue goes, it's important that we move immediately to correct our really upside down state tax system that unfairly burdens low and middle class and working class families and small businesses. And I think that at this time, we're finally able to get some bipartisan support to do that. As far as structured tax revenue kind of things, I would support structured capital gains tax.
Okay.
Our district will not support any kind of income tax, and I will obviously represent my district in that.
Thank you. Your time is up. We'll take these same questions to Bob McCaslin.
Thank you. Well, you know, in the last 6 years, I've seen a pretty huge increase in spending every biennium, and we've, you know, in the Republican caucus in the House, we've been continually reminding our friends on the other side of the aisle that you have to plan for the rainy day, and nobody could have predicted that we'd have a rainy day like this, you know, when it comes to how our revenue has really fallen off. And I think one of the problems that I see, though, is that, you know, the governor's proclamations and things he's done has picked winners and losers, and it blows me away that he thinks that our pot shops are more important than other businesses, and he's been picking the businesses that are allowed to stay open based on tax revenue, not on public safety, really. You know, as a person who has type 1 diabetic, and I've over 60, I wear a mask when I go outside. I don't have a problem with that. I want to make sure I don't give it to somebody else, but we've got to let businesses come back, and state agencies hopefully will make those cuts that they need to make in the same way.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question will go to Lori first. Please explain why you do or do not support statewide just cause legislation or other approaches to address the needs of tenants and landlords.
Oh, no, that, you know, I am not a tenant, but I do have a property, and I do know with my work with the homeless population that, you know, over half of our renters are paying over 30% of their income on rent. Disproportionately, they're low-income women and seniors, disabled folks and minorities. You know, our housing shortage is literally like less than 3% availability. So we do have some just cause eviction kind of legislation that is basically local. And I as a state legislator, would support any kind of efforts that local jurisdictions have to try to increase their housing markets, to have some kind of structures in place to try to keep people in their homes as long as possible. I appreciate that our landlords right now are working with their tenants to try to prevent evictions. Revisions in state laws, you know, I'm not really sure whether or not that's going to be something that we can address, at least in this session, because we have so much other work to do. But I do support the local efforts of governments to use just cause eviction ordinances to increase both housing security and establish standards and enforcement mechanisms that protect both renters and property owners.
Thank you very much. Bob, same question goes to you.
Yeah. Well, you know, in the last two sessions, we saw more legislation than I've ever seen in my whole life that dealt with tenant rights. And basically what all that had done is it assumed that every landlord was a bad landlord. And whether it was purposeful or not, we have seen a huge loss of landlords that own 4 to 5 properties or less. Those people now don't even want to be in the business anymore because of these new laws that have been passed. And so the problem I see is that we've made it way easier, and by we, I don't mean me, but the legislature has made it way easier for the larger, huge, almost corporate level landowners to come in and get those properties. And I challenge any tenant to tell me that things will be better with the large landowner rather than the local person who's willing to come and fix your washer or your sink when you call him because it's his property or her property.
Thank you. Mike Conrad, same question.
So I used to own a house that a rental, and I had this family come to me. They were low income, and I wanted to help them because my heart said help them, and that's what I wanted to do. So I did, and they're a family of 3 kids. Unfortunately, as soon as they got in, they didn't pay anything, and they didn't pay me, and I had rent on. I had my own mortgage to pay, and they ended up being somebody who was on drugs, and it took me a good 7 to 8 months to get them out because they had more rights than I did. And as an owner, I was just trying to build up, my income by doing this, and it turned on me. And I decided I sold that, and I sold my duplexes because of that experience. I don't think it's fair that just because they're low income, they should have more rights than the guy who owns the property, because I lost a lot of money because of that, because they're on drugs and because they would not leave. They destroyed the house. So I think there needs to be somewhere in the middle there, but I don't think that it should default to the person who makes less money. I don't think that should be the reason. There's a lot of variables to it, but I think if there's a lot of things we could look at. One of them is addictions and things like that. And, you know, the ability for the landlord to be able to recover, his losses as well. So I think there's a lot to do there, but that's just my own experience with it.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is going to go to Bob. How would you address the rising homelessness problem in the Spokane area and many other parts of the state?
Well, I've worked with, volunteered with the Union Gospel Mission, both in San Jose, California, when I lived down there, and up here as a volunteer chaplain at Juvenile Hall. And most of the kids that we saw at Juvenile Hall were homeless, a lot of them. Some were homeless by choice. Some were homeless because they just didn't have any place to live. And so I think there are programs that work, like the Union Gospel Mission. They have an incredible success rate. They don't force anybody to get with a program, but they don't have no tolerance for somebody who continues to use drugs either, or continues to make bad choices, because that's, I think we need to remember that housing security for the homeless is a mixed bag in our society right now. And the things that we need to do is bring forth programs that actually get people out of the circle of poverty that they're in, so that they can get into housing. And yes, there's a shortage, but I think there's some things we can do in that area too.
Thank you. The same question from Mike Conrad.
So I think the first thing you got to address with homelessness is mental illness, and what if there is an issue. I think you need to give these people options to be able to, you know, help them, uplift them, and get them into a better space when it comes to their mental capacities. However, you need to be strong as well. I think that you cannot allow to happen what's happening in Seattle, where they're just overtaking people's properties. They're just building, you know, small tent cities in front of people's businesses and destroying the communities. That cannot be allowed. I think that you try to help them first. You try to see if there's a mental illness or there's something you can help them. Maybe there's an addiction you can help them, you know, overcome through different programs. But if they choose not to do that by choice, then I think you need to enforce the law. You need to make sure that they understand that if they don't choose to better their lives, then the next step is they either be arrested or they have to leave. What you don't do is just allow them to control the situation, which I don't agree with. I think what the city council and the mayor of Seattle has done to Seattle is a tragedy. It just shouldn't have happened. And it's because they don't have the fortitude to make these people do what they need to do. They obviously can't make, they've made some bad decisions in their life, and so you need to help them make better ones, whether it's by choice or by force.
Thank you very much. Lori Fagan.
Yeah, thanks. So, wow, that was a lot. Let me just start by saying that there's a lot of misinformation and criminalization of homeless folks out there. Any of us is just a job loss or a health catastrophe away from not being able to pay our rent. And the primary cause of homelessness is housing and the failure of low-income wages to keep up with rising rent costs. There is a sharp increase in prices since 2012 that's put people that have been living on the margins into homelessness. And the problems that are caused by rent increases are worsened by our low vacancy rate. So even when people have the sufficient income or rent assistance to pay for market rents, it's difficult for them to find rental units. And we have to deal with the reality that this wave of COVID-related evictions is coming. And this is a problem that's going to get worse. So addressing homelessness isn't about demonizing homelessness people or calling them addicts or no good. It's about increasing access to affordable permanent housing. And this includes supporting capital investments, using local, state, and federal resources to preserve affordable housing throughout the region, and by using innovation like shared housing and conversions of existing structures to increase rental and affordable rental units. These are the primary local solutions, but as my district representative, I'll support any efforts in any way I can. I will say that the Spokane City County Continuum of Care has developed a 5-year strategic plan to prevent and end homelessness. It's an integrated effort, regional stakeholders to solve the problem. Many smaller communities here in Eastern Washington don't have those resources. to handle this crisis. And in Olympia, I want to be that voice for Eastern Washington and smaller communities who get left behind in this discussion. But again,
thank you, Lori.
Okay,
appreciate that. I'm going to move to another question now. And this one will go to Mike Conrad. What changes to the gun laws in this state would you support or oppose?
So I don't think laws are the answer. If you look at Chicago, obviously they got a lot of gun laws. A lot of people can't own and carry weapons. I currently have a concealed weapons license in the state of Washington, and then I have one in the state of Utah, which gives me reciprocity to carry a gun in 38 different states. I think laws are important to have in place. I think, again, go back to mental health care. You got to make sure people are sane and have the ability to, have critical thinking in decisions when you're carrying a gun. I am not for more gun laws because I don't think laws stop the bad people. They only stop good people from being able to protect their families and themselves. So I support background checks. I'm fine with what's there now. I don't think adding more to that is right. I think we all have a right to the Second Amendment, and we all have the right to carry a gun, and I do.
Thank you very much. Lori, what changes to the gun laws in this state would you support or oppose?
I want to start by saying that I do support the Second Amendment. Like all amendments of the Constitution, it applies to all citizens. And again, I don't feel like it's a partisan or a political issue. I'm a gun owner. I always have been. My family always has been. My son was a hunter. That was part of our family recreation, was going out and doing upland bird hunting. So I respect that we all have a right to carry a gun. I also know that with that right comes responsibilities. And so I do support gun laws that actually target responsible gun ownership and make sure that the guns aren't in the hands of people that shouldn't have them. So I agree, we do need to have thorough background checks. Folks that are convicted or have been accused of domestic violence need to not have access to guns. I think that we need to have really great mental health investments so that folks that have some issues with mental health don't have access to guns. But frankly, people with mental illnesses aren't the people that are actually killing people with guns. It's folks that have other kind of agendas. So I would love to have everybody agree that really what we need to focus on is on gun safety. And every student the gun education alliances, they're all doing a good job of actually taking the narrative and focusing it more on gun safety to make sure that kids don't have access to guns in the homes, that we have great mental health provisions for both juveniles and adults, and that we focus more on gun safety, not on gun control.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
Bob McCaslin.
Well, I support the Second Amendment and all the amendments of the Constitution, but and I have a concealed carry permit. Both my wife and I are gun owners. We've taken classes. The thing that I think that's most important to remember is that when any given area institutes a concealed carry permit, gun crime goes down. And that's only because the criminals out there are, if they know people are armed in their houses, they're less likely to commit those crimes. In Dade County, back in the 90s, they had somewhere between a 40 and 60% difference lowering crime just by instituting concealed carry. And I think that sends a big message to criminals out there that it's not a wise thing to try to come into somebody's house and commit a crime. And so if we continue to do that and we continue to encourage the NRA and a lot of other pro Second Amendment groups are continually to encourage education. And I take a new class at least every 2 years to make sure that my skills are sharp, because it's not a simple issue here. You have to follow the rules and practice. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we will take one more question before we go to closing statements. And we'll start with Lori on this one. Please explain why you would or would not support expanded investment in infrastructure at the state level.
Oh, on the state level. Well, you know, I really focused on infrastructure, transportation improvements on our local level. You know, here locally, we have a lot of transportation improvements that our residents have been really eagerly awaiting. And those projects had been funded and planned before we ended up hitting this roadblock with our state budget deficit. So I would love to be able to say to our residents here in the district that the projects that have been designed need to be funded because they improve public safety, they provide new jobs and business revenue, they prepare our district for future economic growth. And these are investments that are important for us to make as part of what our economic recovery should look like. So I'd like to see that part of our spending prioritized so that we can put folks here in our 4th district back to work, that our residents here have better quality of life. And, you know, and those are all things that are like shorten our commuter time, make sure that we have safe roads going back and forth to school and to work, and to make sure that we have a commerce that's going through our district and supporting our economy. So I will continue to advocate for our district's fair share of those resources so that we can get those projects back online.
Thank you. Bob McCaslin.
Well, as when you're talking about infrastructure right now, you know, connecting the valley projects are pretty important, plus the north-south freeway. The thing that I bring to the table is a great relationship with Mike Gribner, who's our local WASDOT fellow. And he has a really great plan for a chip and seal type of thing, which will lower the cost of keeping the roads that we have in good condition. We're pretty much here in the breadbasket of Washington. And so some of our worst roads are in the areas where we need to get our foodstuffs to market. And if those roads aren't in good shape, we're in trouble. So that's why I had a bill this last session that basically dealt with prioritizing maintenance and preservation on the roads, that some of them are way past 4 years past due in getting the maintenance that they need. And that's probably the least expensive way to approach our infrastructure is to make sure that we're taking care of the roads that we already have, and also looking for all kinds of different ways to save money in building our future roads. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Same question goes to Mike Conrad.
So Mike, my answer is going to be short. I do support the infrastructure increase, but I don't have any details on that because I don't know a lot about it, but it's something I will look into more.
Okay, thank you. And now for your closing statements. You'll each have up to 1 minute, and we'll start with Bob McCaslin.
Well, it's been a real privilege to be able to serve the 4th District for the last 6 years. And I took this job on as something that I didn't want to do it because my dad did it, you know, for 31 years. I wanted to do it because I didn't see anybody from this area who had a strong background in education and had all kinds of other jobs, from waiting tables to being a Volkswagen mechanic. I think I've got a well-rounded background to do this job. And I've been very clear with my constituents who I am. And I feel honored that they've reelected me twice. And I will continue to be a voice for my constituents. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mike Conrad.
So I'm very excited to be running for this position. I think that I bring a lot to the table because I've been a small business owner for over 30 years. I've built several other businesses, and I think that my main goal is to be able to represent those small businesses that are going through some hard times right now. And I also want to represent all constituents within the 4th District. I think I bring a new energy. I can bring excitement. I want my constituents to know that I am there for them. I will be accessible. They can come to me when they have issues within the district or from any agency within the state, or they feel like there's some sort of law or rule that doesn't seem fair. I want them to know that I will fight for them, and I'm not the kind of guy that will just send an email. I will go and meet with them and resolve the issue. So I am excited. I think that I can bring, like I said, a lot of energy, and like I said, like my signs say, I'll trim the fat, whether it's people or it's in the budget or whatever it takes to make it so this state works better.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the participating candidates for the State Legislative District 4 State Representative Position 1. Again, these
Closing comments?
Pardon? Oh, I apologize. Thank you, Lori.
I will never let myself get steamrolled.
Excellent. I really apologize.
No worries.
Please, Lori, would you like to make a closing statement?
That's great. So thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to join you here this evening. I'm so grateful for the League of Women Voters for working to empower our voters and also for your defense of democracy. You know, the COVID-19 pandemic has shown that we're all, again, just one illness or one job loss away from economic devastation. And we have to correct our regressive tax system. We must invest in education equity, ensure that we all have access to quality health care, and that we have an opportunity to reinvest in our public health preparedness and prepare our state infrastructures to create more resilient economy. During this biggest health and economic challenges of our times, it's important to stop the partisanship. We have too much to do. So my experience as a woman, as a parent, as a nurse leader, as a health provider, all of these things involve me in this community. They inform my understanding of our shared values and our priorities, and also my commitment to be a proud representative of this district. So I'm Lori Fagan. I'm running for office to be the new state representative for the 4th District, and I'd be honored to have your vote.
And thank you for catching my error.
Thank you so much.
Again, thank you to the participating candidates for State Legislative District 4 State Representative Position 1. Again, they are Mike Conrad, Republican, Lori Fagan, Democrat, Bob McCaslin, Republican, and Dave Whitehead, Republican. Dave was unable to join us tonight. This concludes our 2020 primary election candidate forum featuring candidates for State Legislative District 4 State Representative Position 1. The League will host a general election forum in late September for the top 2 finishers in this race. Once again, here's a reminder about voting in the primary. Ballots must be mailed or deposited in ballot boxes in convenient community locations by August the 4th, 2020, or can be dropped off at one of the voter service centers on August the 4th. The top 2 vote getters in this race will advance to the general election. In order to vote, you must be registered to vote. You can register by mail or online by July 27th, 2020, or you can register in person by August the 4th at the elections office, 1033 West Gardner Avenue, and at the Center Place in Spokane Valley. For more information on voting procedures, go to www.spokanecounty.org/elections. If you have questions or special concerns regarding casting your ballot, you may contact the Spokane County Elections Office at 509-477-2320. On behalf of the League of Women Voters, thank you to all of our candidates for their participation in this forum. We hope that this has given you, the voters, information about the candidates that will help you make an informed decision when marking your ballots by Tuesday, August the 4th, 2020. Additional voter service information is available through the League of Women Voters at www.lwvspokane.org. You can also learn more about the candidates at the League of Women Voters online voting guide, Vote 411, at www.vote411.org. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.